Iraq was one of the most heavily armed societies in the world. And on a per capita basis, Iraq's gun ownership rivaled other clan-based societies like those of Yemen and Somalia, where virtually everyone is armed. But those corroded rifles and pistols passed down along generations were the least of the Americans' problems. Along with emptying prisons, Saddam also made life difficult for the Americans by dumping small collections of weapons and explosives among the Iraqi population, and distributed rifles. But some weapons dumps were massive, the size of small cities. There were also the Iraqi military arsenals just ripe for the picking. With the army effectively non-existent and a lack of US troops to guard these depots, Iraqis began breaking into them. The result was that Iraq, which was already a heavily armed society, became overflowing with weaponry. Estimates put the number at up to 1 million metric tons. There is more ammunition in Iraq than any place I've ever been in my life, and it is all not securable. These weapons would be sold or simply passed out for free to friends and family. Now, almost every Iraqi had a Kalashnikov or other variant, and many had machine guns and RPGs. For example, the American Congress and subsequently the public would not be informed until the end of October of 2004, more than 18 months after the war began, that a cache of over 380 tons of artillery shells, plastic explosives, mortar rounds, TNT, and other powerful conventional explosives was cleaned out by looters. This storage site, which was just 30 miles from Baghdad, was left unguarded by the US military. This was certainly an error that would come to haunt them. Perhaps the single most devastating move for the American occupation was the outright firing of roughly 500,000 Iraqi state workers at the drop of a hat. On May 16th and May 23rd, the occupation's leader, Paul Bremer III, would issue CPA Orders No. 1 and 2, respectively. CPA stands for the Coalition Provisional Authority, the name given to the American occupation. These orders were known collectively as de-Baathification, and went a long way toward fueling the growing resistance. Order No. 1 fired anyone who worked in the top 3 management layers of all government ministries, state-owned industries, universities, even hospitals. These employees were deemed automatically to be senior Ba'ath Party members, and they would be banned from future employment in the Iraqi government. This was controversial even within US circles. For instance, the CIA chief of station in Iraq was gravely worried that, by nightfall, you'll have driven 30,000 to 50,000 Baathists underground. And in 6 months, you'll really regret doing this. In fact, the number would be as high as 85,000 people, just fired outright. Order No. 2 fired the entire Iraqi armed forces and the Interior Ministry, which included the National Police. Together, these two orders would put out of work over 500,000 people. Marine Colonel Thomas Ham summarized the move like this: "Now you have a couple 100,000 people who are armed because they took their weapons home with them, who know how to use the weapons, who have no future, and who have a reason to be angry at you." When Bremer did that, the insurgency went crazy. May was the turning point. According to an official U.S. Army study of the war, just over a day into the invasion, on March 22nd, quote, "Expecting a positive reception, Sergeant First Class Anthony Broadhead led a hunter-killer team of 3 Bradleys and 2 M1 tanks toward the bridge where some Iraqis had assembled. As his tank approached the bridge, Broadhead waved at the Iraqis, but rather than waving back, the Iraqis responded with AK-47 fire. The fight quickly escalated as paramilitary forces engaged from pickup trucks armed with small arms, machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and mortars. The study maintains that this was a significant event since, for the first time, but not the last time, well-armed paramilitary forces, indistinguishable except for their weapons from civilians, attacked the squadron. A week later saw the first suicide bombing against coalition forces since the war began. A taxicab laden with explosives would kill 4 U.S. soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division in the city of Najaf. By midsummer, the lid on the burgeoning Iraqi resistance had blown off, and bombings became rampant and regular. The Iraqi resistance sought to target not only Americans, but also their allies and partners. August proved to be an important month. On the 7th, a bomb-filled van parked outside the embassy of Jordan. The blast threw a nearby car onto a roof. In the rubble were 17 dead. But among the most momentous and successful attacks, fighters targeted the Canal Hotel, which housed the offices of the United Nations. Driving a cement truck filled with explosive artillery shells, a suicide bomber crashed into the outer wall of the hotel, sending a shockwave so powerful that it blasted the windows of the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment a half-mile away. The attack killed 23 people, including the chief UN officer in Iraq. The effects of the bombing were dramatic. The UN mission in Iraq drew its staff down from 800 international staffers to just 15. Colonel Thomas Hams described the fallout in a report for the National Defense University. Quote, "The August 19, 2003 bombing of the UN headquarters in Iraq convinced the organization that continuing to operate in Iraq would be too costly. In the following weeks, numerous other international organizations, including the IMF and the World Bank, would pull out of Iraq, which was seen as a massive victory for the resistance. That was a brilliant campaign. They hit the UN, the Red Cross, the Jordanian embassy, and the Iraqi police. And we were calling them dead-enders. Who do you think is disorganized at that point?" The Muslim holy month of Ramadan would commence at the end of October of 2003. This was the first time since the invasion that the foe turned fully on US forces. On the 26th, a mortar attack on a Baghdad police station killed Private First Class Rachel Bosveld. Then, a flurry of rockets were fired at the Rashid Hotel, which housed the CPA offices within the U.S. Green Zone. The next day, 4 police stations were bombed simultaneously throughout Baghdad, using truck bombs painted to look like police vehicles and filled with over 1,000 pounds of plastic explosive. These attacks marked the beginning of what is now known as the Ramadan Offensive, and it would bring the highest rate of American fatality since the start of the invasion. Attacks would become far more sophisticated during Ramadan, and the number of them would increase sharply. To compare, during the summer of 2003, there were roughly 15 attacks on US soldiers a day. By mid-November, that number jumped to 45 a day, and it was also at this time that Iraqis became adept at attacking aircraft. In October and November, they managed to shoot down 3 helicopters, including a Black Hawk helicopter killing 6 soldiers and a Chinook helicopter killing 16 soldiers. Helicopters now frequently had to fly back due to guerrillas firing at them. On November 15th, 2 Black Hawks collided into one another while trying to evade rifle fire, killing 17 soldiers. The Army even had to conclude that the Apache helicopter was so vulnerable to rocket and machine gun fire that it would no longer have a major role in attacks. The Iraqis were learning and adapting quickly, using what they had at their disposal, but they would kill many, many American soldiers through a simple device that littered many roads frequented by American Humvees and personnel carriers throughout the country. The IED, which stands for Improvised Explosive Device, is one of the key hallmarks of the war in Iraq. Its simplicity is both a symbol of the disproportionate firepower that the Americans wielded, as well as the cleverness of the Iraqi resistance to use all manner of essentially scraps of electronics and weapons to fashion devices that proved to be especially lethal to occupation forces. So lethal, in fact, that in the first year of the Iraqi guerrilla war against the Americans, 1/3 of dead US troops were killed by these low-tech and inexpensive roadside bombs. And they weren't just good at killing American soldiers, but also wounding them. 2/3 of soldiers wounded so badly that they needed to be evacuated from Iraq were hit by IEDs. Aside from the human cost, the monetary cost was staggering. In 2006, the Pentagon set up an office to deal with the threat of IEDs called the Joint IED Defeat Organization. By 2011, the yearly budget was $2.8 billion. And that's not counting the roughly $45 billion spent on mine-resistant vehicles. All to fight a bomb that cost roughly $30 to make. Indeed, IEDs were very crude. All one had to do was put a detonator on a bomb or artillery shell, and you've essentially made one. In the summer of 2003, nearly all IEDs were hardwired, meaning they were connected directly to the detonator. A fighter would have to hold the detonator, which was connected by a long wire to the explosive. In this instance, US forces were able to locate the wire, then follow it until they found the fighter on the other end and liquidated them. But then, guerrillas figured out how to detonate these devices remotely, using RC car controllers, car alarm transmitters, and especially cell phones. The people who detonated these bombs, also known as triggermen, were the frontline troops of the resistance, and the cell phone became one of the most important tools in their arsenal. IED explosions would reportedly be videotaped by attackers in order to improve their techniques and use the footage for propaganda and recruitment purposes. Though the US spent billions outfitting Humvees with armor to resist IED explosions, the Iraqis again adapted their ways and began placing IEDs in tree branches and light poles. Since armor plates were placed on doors, the blast would be downward facing in order to blow windows in, and also to hit the machine gunners poking out on top of the vehicles. "We got better armor, they started getting better ordnance," said Colonel Bob Chase of the 2nd Marine Division. Chase was commenting on an IED attack near Haditha, which killed 14 Marines with a single explosion, hitting an amphibious assault vehicle. This was at the time a new development in IED technology, called the underbelly bomb, detonated from deep inside the ground and blasting vehicles from underneath. These bombs were also massive, able to utterly destroy a Humvee or even a tank. Just 100 pounds of explosives detonated under an armored vehicle was the equivalent of a direct hit from a 6-gun artillery battery. Yet even a single 155mm artillery round containing just 18 pounds of explosives could easily destroy a tank on its own. That's just a damn difficult thing to defeat. IEDs were so effective that attacks increased steadily. In the year 2005, an IED attack occurred every 48 minutes, twice the rate of the year before. By the fall, there were 1,800 of these bombings a month. And the distribution of these IEDs was also sending another message to the occupation. Since they were so widely distributed on roads throughout the country, this could only mean that they were unreported by local Iraqis. A major blow to morale for US forces, who of course went into Iraq thinking they'd be welcomed as liberators. The violence was detrimental to the coalition early on. Along with the UN, World Bank, Oxfam, and the IMF all pulling out, other countries' militaries also found Iraq ultimately uninhabitable. Spain would leave in May 2004, then Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, the Philippines, Hungary. The next year, the Netherlands, Ukraine, also Poland, Bulgaria, and Italy, probably the 3 most important European allies in Iraq, would announce their plans to get the fuck out of Dodge. In the end, a $30 bomb was enough to kill probably half of the US war dead, and the resistance was so overwhelming against such an awesome occupying force that it should indeed be studied in insurgency and revolutionary circles for many years to come.